So good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's event. My name is Simon Bustamante, and I'm the seminar coordinator and member of the board of Svenska sällskapet för filosofisk praxis, or in English, the Swedish Association for Philosophical Practice. We are a non-profit association promoting the practice of philosophical dialogue in Swedish society. All of it, on every level of it, but foremost in healthcare, schools, and public places, such as libraries and museums. Our goal is to take philosophy out of a strictly academic setting and into everyday life. And this association was founded in 2011, so we've been around for quite some time. And since last year, we've regularly arranged events like these, book seminars where we invite Swedish and international philosophers and philosophical practitioners to talk about their work. And tonight's guest is here with us from all across the Atlantic Sea in Vancouver, Canada, to be precise. Our evening is his morning, to be more precise. His name is Michael Picard, an MIT-trained philosopher who recently published his book called How to Play Philosophy. And I would best describe it as a collection of lyrical, perhaps even poetic essays on a big range of philosophical topics or themes, from love, desire, and loneliness to knowledge, meaning, and faith. So without much further ado, Michael, the digital floor is yours.
Hi there. Thank you very much for inviting me to the Swedish Association for Philosophical Praxis. It's very nice to be recognized. I didn't know about the society. How did I know about it? Except on LinkedIn, through LinkedIn, where Tulsa Jansen invited me, and I'd like to thank her for that invitation. To get started, and also to Simon Bustamante for organizing everything. I appreciate it very much. So one difficulty I had in thinking about what to do for this seminar was that the book itself is a collection of different pieces. So there's no single theme or thesis of the book, nothing for me to defend here. So that worried me a little bit until I realized how liberating it was not to have to defend very much. But so what I'm going to do instead is just talk a little bit about my practice and background in the philosophy, how or from which the book grew, and other things I've been doing in philosophical praxis that I hope will be of interest to you. So yes, I as mentioned, I got a PhD in philosophy from MIT. I worked in the philosophy of mathematics. Poincaré and Russell, a big debate they had about the foundations of mathematics, and it was lots of fun and also somewhat hell. You know, that's also graduate school. But I went on from there for various jobs, but those more or less petered out, and I found myself not quite sure what to do. Eventually, that's like 12 years ago or so now, since then I've been working at Douglas College for the last 12 years or so. And I've had a lot of time to think about what happened in between there. What happened was Café Philosophy. I started a 12-year run of weekly philosophical sessions with the public, inspired by Marc Sauté, who, of course, in 1992 started in Paris and had a run for a while. I started in 97, directly on his imitation. I still recall my neighborhood cafe where I'd go daily for a mug of coffee. There was a London Telegraph article about Marc Sauté, and the owners directed my attention to it and said, you could do that here. And my reaction was, strangely to say, anger, although I did fill up my coffee first, and then I was left. And went to my shop nearby. I had a philosophy shop nearby where I had a fledgling kind of philosophical praxis. And I thought, anger, why was I angry? I was angry. The idea just angered me. And when I stopped to think about just the curiosity of that emotion, like what the hell does anger have to do? And I realized that I had already decided that I was definitely going to do it, and that I had no idea how to do it, and there was nobody to show me. And this is what I was upset about. So I had no model. I knew that Mark Sauté existed. I didn't know what his approach to it was, or what the approach should be, or anything. So I just had my own, and it evolved over the years. One thing that was there from the start is people chose topics. For the first couple of years, we would, at the end of each session, we would we'd have a little vote on 3 possible questions that members would suggest. And this went on for some time. I don't know how long, why it went on so long, because it didn't really work very well. The winning topic also was very often merely a plurality supported. And to come up with questions like that, and philosophically interesting questions like that on the fly, it took a process of me negotiating them or managing them a little bit before they were even coherent. Sometimes they weren't quite questions, and they needed to be worked with a little bit. So the whole thing took too much time. I gradually developed a different process that also had input, in which I listed, first for a couple of weeks, I took topic suggestions just in the form of a single word from audience participants over a couple of weeks, until I got a list of 40 or 50 of them. And I prepared a ballot like that and passed that around for usually for 1 week or so. And people could just vote the topics up or down. So the winning topics, the top 12 or 16 or so, would set the agenda for the next month. I would arrange them in a suitable way. I would add questions myself to sort of amplify and bring out what the meaning of the topic was. Let me go like this. So it's not quite working. And that method worked for many years, and that's how I determine topics. And that really is what determines the topics of the book. Over time, I started to write questions. I started to write things. I had an email list. I would tell people what the topic was. Let me just mention the array of 16 topics, the list of 16 topics that allowed us to took place through over 4 months, allowed promotion of the events. I could tell the media, these are the topics. The questions could be a little bit more provocative or interesting. All the regular events columns would mention Café Philosophy like this. And since I knew what the topics were in advance, I could prepare a little bit myself. And I did that at first by writing things, a paragraph about the topic in the email that I sent out. And that some of those first paragraphs, I think one of them actually survives in the book, is just a list of questions. It was like I had the topic, one word topic, which is a little bit limiting from a philosophical point of view because it's ambiguous, but that's a sort of an advantage when you're trying to get people to attend in certain ways. So I would have questions that were a bit provocative, open it up in different ways. But I just expanded that to a whole paragraph of questions, especially when it was a topic that was popular, like the soul. I think that's what the one I'm remembering that's in the book. The soul is a topic that is popular at a Café Philosophy. Everybody wants to talk about their soul. But in philosophy, it's a little bit hard still to talk about that in a meaningful way. You have to sort of take it one way or another. So rather than taking a position on what the soul was, I just had a whole bunch of questions, somewhat about them. That was how those essays started. Over time, they grew a little bit, and they took on the function of giving background to people in the discussions. People were from all walks of life. They weren't necessarily philosophers, rarely philosophers. I think of the academic philosophers in Victoria, I think that 2 came over the 12 years, once each. I was completely anathema to what the philosophy department was. A very highly analytic department. I mean, they snapped me up because I was fresh out of MIT, and I said, oh, I'll do the Eastern philosophy, sure. So I did all the wrong things when I got there, but and for whatever reason, after a couple of years, I found myself not working in the philosophy department. Anyway, there's a little bit more of a story there towards the end of Café Philosophy. I may come around to it, but let me continue. The origin of the essays as basically emails, posts to participants really determines a lot of the character of the essays, or at least my choices in response to the problem. Coming out of MIT and sort of struggling to get my thesis accepted, the writing, there was certain style and demand for writing that I struggled with, frankly, at MIT. And then I ended up writing a sort of historically nuanced piece with a theoretical gem in it, rather than the usual sort of analytic argument setup that my peers were doing and I was expected to do. So anyway, out of MIT, I had a difficulty. I didn't really want to write the things I was expected to write. Café Philosophy came around after a few years, maybe 4 or 5 or something. I realized, you know, I have an audience here that I can speak to in some way who are interested in philosophy. So I shifted, instead of writing upward, instead of writing to my superiors, my advisors, the professionals in the field, I had a ready-made audience, and they weren't dummies by any stretch of the matter. They were doctors and psychologists and professionals, government people and stuff, as well as some younger people and cab drivers, and like there was a variety of curious people, and they quickly got to know each other and made bonds and became friends. And so they were curious, and they were curious about what I had to say. So I was in a bit of a dilemma, because it wasn't really appropriate for me to put forward my positions, to take stances, sometimes controversial perhaps, and those then become the focus at Café Philosophy. I didn't want that to happen. So I had to write to these people without kind of letting them know what I thought, to some extent, and just saying, these are the issues, you think about it. And so that's the flavor of most of the essays. There's a lot of background explanation. Here's what Plato and Aristotle, here's what Kant would say about these things, and a lot of attacks on straw man, straw person sort of things, that is, things people would say. Because people would say these things at Café Philosophy. So I'm responding to ghosts in a way. I'm responding to things that I knew people would say, like with regard to beauty. This was a topic that was very popular. It came up many times. I could go into different theories, philosophical theories, but actually it wasn't my forte in philosophy. And as much as I was interested, I couldn't really do that for that essay in a week's notice. So instead, I personified beauty, and I presented myself as beauty's butler, taking care of her, concerned with her, and overawed by her beauty, but just outraged at the things people say about her, that she's only skin deep. And so all these cliches about beauty, I was able to sort of take apart right away, because I knew that they would come up at Café Philosophy. They're the first things that people would say. So they rely on these sound bites and so on. So it becomes very important to invert them, to find the opposites of them, to upset their apple carts before the event happened. So writing the things before Café Philosophy in order to provoke thinking, to prime thinking in certain ways, in certain directions. Since our topics were often one word, and these words are multiply ambiguous. They go, there starts a whole different areas in philosophy, different regions of philosophy. So I would, like, one paragraph would be about one meaning, and then I would shift and talk about a different meaning, just so that I would disambiguate the terms for people. So that was really the purpose of it. But along the way, there was lots of room for play, and it couldn't become too didactic. Since I'm a frustrated poet, yeah, some of it turned out to be a little bit lyrical. All right, so that's where the essays come from. And I think I go into it shows a little bit about the character of them, which is sort of unusual. And someone said, a colleague from India who ordered it and had a look at it, said, I can see why you might think your thesis advisors might not think too highly of it from it. Like, he himself was from Pittsburgh. So anyway, a couple more things about that background story that I want to perhaps mention is that in the end, Café Philosophy sort of petered out. It was difficult. It flattened out. It became boring. And everybody knew it, and I knew it. I made various attempts to set fires to get things going towards the end, but nothing really happened. And in retrospect, some of my efforts seemed to were rather misguided. At one point, I tried to set up a logic coaching sort of squad of people who would be sort of especially responsible for critical thinking interventions in the cafe, and it didn't work, needless to say. But so there were a bunch of things I tried that didn't work. The problem was, in some ways, it was a victim of its success. There was quite a community connection amongst many of the participants, and over time there were quite a few participants who varied, in terms of how often they would come, but they all knew each other and sometimes connected, sometimes had relationships come and go. In fact, I did over that 12 years. And for others, at least, it was always the question about, you break up and who gets, who gets the couch and who gets the car and who gets Café Philosophy, because they didn't both want to go anymore. But so the community aspect developed greatly. And one of the things that really solidified that was in our final location, where we stayed for 6 or 7 years. Great location, great cafe, very supportive. There was a regular who lived nearby in a glorious place in Victoria with ocean views, and so said, opened his place up each week after the cafe, and so people could walk over there, and often did, and it became very entertaining. We called it the après cafe. And often, or not often, I guess, but sometimes the discussion would continue, at least in some circles. I think it mostly did. And that was a very positive thing. It was great for me because it took some of the organizational heat off my shoulders. I kind of wanted to distance myself a little bit from the crowd after 3 hours. So someone else stepping up and taking over that social function was really great. And it was a very positive thing that gave years to the length of the cafe, I'm sure. However, in the end, it became a circle of friends. It became much more like, and not the best kind of Aristotelian friends, where this is a regular, I heard him speaking last week. In fact, he's saying basically the same thing he said last week and the week before. So we'll just wait and listen, not really listen to him, we'll wait till he's done and think about what we're going to say next and so on. So what one person said really did not reflect anything about what the previous person said. That's kind of typical at Café Philosophy, frankly. It really goes in a lot of different directions. But the extent to which people were not really listening to each other because they expected already what people were going to say, it was so far away from, I'm going to challenge you. And why should I challenge you when I'm going to go to your place and drink a wine afterwards? And so there was a little bit of too much camaraderie, and it crowded out critical thinking. And so my attempts at logic coaching and other kinds of things were doomed to failure. So fortunately, at that time, I got a decent job offer at Douglas College, and so I left Victoria. I went to a different city, but I continued because here in this city, there's a much larger program called the Philosopher's Cafe program. It's run out of Simon Fraser University as part of their community outreach or community education offerings. And it was started not long after I started, at the start of 1997. Shortly after, I think it's the next year, Joseph Wosk began this program, which still continues. It's taken a big hit from COVID. I'm not sure. I don't think it's quite up and running yet. But they had like 35 different locations, usually once a month around here, libraries, cafes, all over. It was an award-winning program in terms of community education and Canada and elsewhere. Joseph Wosk is really quite a remarkable person, Order of British Columbia, Order of Canada recently, and a great sponsor of this kind of public dialogue and independent scholars and that sort of thing. And I mention him because one of the things that came out of, has more recently come out of Café Philosophy, once I got a bit of a distance from what happened at and basically kind of the failure at the end, I started to think about what went wrong. I continued with Simon Fraser's program. I tried a few different innovations and so on, but I was trying to find something new, a new modality for public participatory philosophy, which I take to be the generic name for Café Philosophy. A new form of it. And eventually I did find something about that, but part of that was a process of editing a book that was really started as a Joseph Wosk festschrift. It's coming out soon. It's called Café Conversations. I edited it, and it's all but done. There's just a final bits being done, and I'd like to mention a little bit about it because I think that it's the first book, at least in English, that has deals with the theory, as it were, of public participatory philosophy. There really isn't anything about that. I think there's stuff in Dutch that I can't read, but I gathered together facilitators from all over the world who do this. If maybe I can share my screen here, actually. Let's see. Yeah, that should work. Can people see that? I don't know if we, yes, I don't know.
Yes.
So, so this is, of course, the book, How to Play Philosophy, that I'm talking about. But on the right here, you see Café Conversations, local publisher. And I'll just scroll down here. You see there's a Mark Sauté. Maybe it would help if I magnified this a little bit. Can I just go like that? Yeah, that'll work. I translated excerpts of Mark Sauté's Un Café pour Socrates. The first chapter is about Café Philosophy. So this is the first time it'll appear in English. And I have a paper I also translated by Daniel Ramirez, who took over, one of the people who took over from Mark Sauté afterwards. From Belgium, we have a piece from Switzerland, a couple of pieces from Belgium, actually, a current and also a early follower of Mark Sauté and a current younger person pursuing Café Philosophy, Albert Hoffman, from Japan, from Peru, from Mexico, and also this Walter Cohen, you may well have heard of. He's really wonderful. Argentinian, but he's lived in Brazil. Very well known in philosophy for children. So him and there's down below Barbara Weber, who's a professor at UBC here, University of British Columbia here, are very well known in philosophy for children. And this is what I managed to do also, not just people who work in public participatory philosophy, but people who work in an allied field. Philosophy for children is, I'm looking at the wrong place here. I know that's my thing. Philosophy for children is quite advanced theoretically compared to public participatory philosophy. It's been going on for years. There are graduate programs, there are different theories, there are different approaches. That doesn't really exist for Café Philosophy. There are different approaches, there's lots of different approaches, but you know, what's really going on in this and what the theoretical challenges are has not really been made clear. So I have tried to do that in a couple of places. So the second chapter in particular, Lydia Meir has a historical piece about Café Philosophy. Of course, her scholarship is, the reach of her scholarship is great and impressive. Ellie Pierakakos has written a wonderful paper about relying on Foucault, which really conceives of philosophical praxis in a way as almost synonymous with spirituality. I guess Foucault defines spirituality as like the flip side of if philosophy is about search for truth somehow, then spirituality is what you do to put that into practice in some sense. Now, a few papers, and the final thing is just a wonderful piece by Joseph Wosk, the Café, what did we call it? The Cosmic Café. It's a really speculative, imaginative, amazing piece. It's a universal choreography, but there's an alchemical allusions in it. He's a most, it's just a great paper. It's a, now, the things I wrote for this are a couple of things. I wrote an extensive history for Café Philosophy, of Café Philosophy in Victoria, and I wrote an extensive critique. Actually, it's a republished critique of it, in which I sort of went through all the problems. After a few years, I had figured out what was going wrong, at least in the way I was approaching it. And so I published a critique of that, presented it at an earlier conference, and it's republished here at the end of that. I should say I used for that ideas by an American political philosopher, Anthony Simon Layden. And he's also got a piece in here, which is also reprinted. His idea is really, he's got a wonderful book for Oxford University Press called Social Reasoning, in which he tries to reconceive reason as a conversation instead of a proof. You know, like they said at MIT, well, my dissertation was kind of in proof theory. So, but it's instead of like a set of, an organized set of reasons to establish a particular conclusion or something like that. It's a give and take, and there's a logic of that he tries to set out. And I just found this really quite liberating as someone who works worked in creating conversations to think, oh, there's a theory that we can think of this as reasoning in certain ways. So I use that both to critique my practice and to set up a list of desiderata, values and principles that a facilitator should embrace. It's all kind of Anthony Layden speak. It's his way of speaking, his theoretical terms, those criteria. And then based on that, some years later, I sort of put that all aside and forgot about it. But then some years later, working with other facilitators of Café Philosophy, trying to come up with a new idea, I hit upon the idea of philosophy sports. And there's also quite a substantial write-up, the first about philosophy sports, that is going to be appearing in this book, Café Conversations. I'll just leave the screen there because there are a few more things that I wanted to mention. How am I doing for time here?
Can I just ask you, hi Michael, a clarificatory question?
Absolutely.
So the slide you just showed us with all the super interesting papers and books, are those from the Café Conversations, or?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
Those
Okay.
are all from Café Conversations. Yeah.
Okay.
So, and that will be appearing very soon. You can actually pre-order it here. I think there's I've got a, yeah, that's $17. I think that's, yeah, that's probably US, 17 US. Yes. All right. So let me go back there. So I'm talking about a different book, but there you go. I hope people get interested in that. There are a number of very rich papers in it. Now, I mentioned philosophy sports. Now, this is also, I talk about that to give a very brief overview and the beginning of how to play philosophy. And what that is actually, there's something, you may have heard of it, it's international now, but I think it was developed in Western Canada originally, but although I think by an English person, I can't really remember, theater sports. I actually attended when I was going to the University of Calgary. It's like the poetry slams, it's kind of competitive comedy, often with a lot of audience interactions. Like the audience would say, here's a crazy scenario, and then the comedians would do a sketch comedy, improvised sketch comedy based on that. So you really got to develop your skills for that. It was a skill-based kind of skill-building thing for the creators, for the poets and so on. But using something like that, and on that model, I started thinking, well, Café Philosophy is participatory, and if there's already more participation by the people who come. But it needs to be structured in a certain way. So it occurred to me that if you structure it in the form of a game where there's an element of competition. Now, normally I'm not one that thinks competition is like, I'm not a market competition sort of person, but I was kind of converted a little bit by attending some poetry slams, because around here they're kind of a big thing. They're regional things. They're competitions of poets who give these performances, and there's an array of judges. And what I really like about it is that the judges give their score, and then the rest of the audience scores the judges, and they can boo the judges for if they like a poet, but the judges score them poorly. But when I went to that, I thought, like, poetry and competition, come on. But what I found is that all the performers were really supporting each other and calling each other, you know, praising each other, and they traveled from different cities. So they built up a kind of audience. The competition was really just an excuse. And there was a little bit of a fun playfulness to it because the judges could be made fools of. So there was something about that I thought could be useful. And so I basically kind of tried to gamify dialogue and gamify a debate. Now, a debate, I never thought of Café Philosophy as a debate. Well, maybe in the beginning a little bit still, but at a certain point I moved to a dialogue thing using open questions, inviting different points of view, and well before I even started writing on it. by kind of gamifying, putting this competitive element into it, the rules, the fairness rules about what's fair play and what's a reasonable play kind of become a stand-in for logic and for the validity of arguments. And so I came up with a game at first because the idea was to do it, to basically use people's phones at a Café Philosophy event to provide a kind of infrastructure to the dialogue that would focus a little bit more on careful wording and building up an argument. So that's what you say, but what do you say to support that? And so I conceived of this, and I started working on this and developing this, and one thing I discovered was that it had a bigger price tag than I was prepared to develop it. So I came up with a low-cost alternative, which is a board game. I have one here, but it doesn't show very well. Like this, which I've used in class a few times. You use it with index cards, which you can, which students fill out. You know, they put their one sentence on here, and then they put it in the center area. Oh, you can't see that, I'm putting it up against the screen. But they put it in the center black area, and everybody votes, and they vote by using little tokens, game pieces. And there's a two-stage voting. That's the main thing. First, they vote on the main claim, and in the board game, that determines which side of the board they play on. So you see main claim true versus main claim false. So they'll put their piece on one side of the board or the other. But what they're actually voting on each time they put their piece on the board is the premise that's in the center. So the premises are played, their reasons in play, and if they get enough support, then they can be moved up to these yellow areas, and the yellow areas fit several of these index cards. And so you can build up a case or an argument in support of the main claim, or on the other side against the main claim. And so so that was just the board game, but it now exists as an app, I'm very happy to say, which I've used in class. So I'll just leave that up there for now. You can find out more about it here at Philosophy Sports. The web app demo is, or there's a video about it. That's actually where you can find out most about it. It's here somewhere on my YouTube channel. This video here, that's called Tug of Logic web app. This gives a demo of it. This is from a talk I gave in India. I urge you to do it, but actually what I'm really after is subscribers. If people can subscribe, because if I can get to 100 with, I'm really ambitious here. I want to get to 100 because then I can name the video URLs. It's a rule. Okay, so I'm already up to 13. That's up like 40% or something in the last 2 weeks. I'm doing great. All right, so anyway, jokes aside here, you can get a demo of what the app looks like, but I'll put this back. So the app really exists now, and basically it's two-stage voting. First, people declare sides on a main issue, and then there's a series of bouts of logical scrimmage where premises that are put forward are selected and debated. And here's the thing that's a little bit innovative. It's an audience response system that's got a kind of logical structure to it. But the thing is that players can change the wording of their premise at any time. So if they're not getting enough support, or other people say, I'll support it if you change this word to that word, then they can actually alter it, and that will change the voting. The voting is a kind of social feedback mechanism. People see where the whole crowd is standing at a given time. And so they can either get enough support for their premise or not enough support. And what constitutes enough is determined by a logic referee who has to be running the whole game. But gradually, in the same way, they tried to build up arguments for or against a controversial main claim, but they can do that in structured ways. Now, the whole app isn't built yet, but it will be open source. It will be available on the philosophy website for people to use. So I hope that's coming soon, and that comes out of my searing self-critique of my practice at at Café Philosophy. Now I see I'm about out of time, and I'd like to open things up for questions. I haven't even talked about how to play philosophy. I guess I did a little bit at the beginning. There is one more project I would like to mention just in closing, and this I'm very excited about. I have been working with to translate Gerd Achenbach into English. So I have a contract with Lexington Books in the United States for 2 of his books, and I've been working with Achenbach on a weekly basis or so for the last year or so, and it's just been an absolute thrill to do that. It's been very exciting just to get the layers and layers of association and meaning that he intended with some of his texts, which are interestingly, they have this sort of poetic or lyrical quality that was mentioned earlier, that some of my writing shares, but just the background association and the audience, I think in some ways is the same. He's writing to the general educated, interested public, although it's a German public, so it's much more educated than perhaps the North American one I have to write to. So all right, so that's the books are Philosophical Practice and On Right in Wrong, and connected with that, there will also be a special issue of the American journal, Philosophical Practice Journal, Philosophical Practice, the APPA journal, Lou Maranoff's journal. Eventually, there'll be a special issue in that of Achenbach's writings in English. Okay, so that, I guess I'll leave it at that. I'm out of time. I'd be happy to have any questions, and maybe even some questions about the book, since I didn't talk about that as much as I thought I would. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. So let's open up for some questions. Feel free to raise your hand or just ask Michael your question. I can start. So if Café Conversations sounds more like the theoretical framework for participatory philosophical inquiry, and you presented the tug of logic, a gamified version of that, what would you say how to play philosophy? What part does that book play?
Right. It has a much more organic connection with Café Philosophy. So the audience of the book, in some sense, is the Café Philosophy audience writ large. I was originally writing to them, these group of people, but they're the people who would, that slice of our society that would come, or those slices of society that would come to Café Philosophy. Other people, one clarification about Café Conversations book, in addition to some of the historical and theoretical pieces that are in there, there are also a number of reports from people around the world doing different practices. It's thriving in Japan and Latin America. So we have some reports from there about those practices that are not necessarily all theoretical. So the whole book isn't like that. But so how to play philosophy is much more public facing. It's meant to stimulate people's thinking. I do think that as a trained analytic philosopher, it's a little bit unsatisfying from that point of view. But I abandoned that a long time ago, so I don't mind so much. So this is really the spirit of philosophy with a public face. It's trying to set the we say there's an expression in English, get the bug. Can't even remember the expression, but when the bug bit you. You really get the spirit of it, kind of thing. So the bug of philosophy needs to bite you a little bit, and this gets people stimulating by taking apart expected views, standard sort of views that are on the tip of people's tongues, by providing a broader philosophical context, more like a menu. Here are different philosophers, they have something to say about this issue, rather than which is right, with an emphasis on difference and disagreement. And sometimes that kind of, that plays on the wonder of philosophy, because we don't yet know, kind of thing. But the other thing is that I think this is a little bit was important for writing those papers and important for public facing, is that philosophy is fun. There's a fun, I remarked, notice how several of the papers in Café Philosophy actually go back to that one of the reasons we're doing this is, frankly, it's just fun. Okay, so like, to have fun with philosophy is important, because philosophy has a certain, reputation of seriousness and irrelevance, ponderous irrelevance at times. So I do not mind at all taking shots at the airs that philosophy puts on. So by explaining these philosophers, but also taking them down a notch. I love the great philosophers. I mean, I was bitten by that philosophy bug earlier. I love them all, despite the fact that some of them were bloody racists and they had terrible views about things. In Canada, it's sort of, it comes with the thing, you sort of love the country, but then, and we had that apartheid thing going on there for a while. So I'm sorry about that. But like there's a love and a vehement disagreement with things. And I try to convey that with most of the philosophers, rather than any kind of allegiance. The other thing that's kind of interesting about it is that the topic selection is really determined by what people wanted to talk about. Well, actually, in the end, it was determined by the limits of the book. I had to throw out a bunch of essays. I hope they'll be on my this other website up here. Not that one. Where is it? This one. Oh, do I have it up here? Maybe I don't have it up here. Oh yeah, this is the one here up. This is the one. Yeah, there's a video blogs and another blog of essays and so on. So I think some of the things that didn't make the book will also appear there shortly in the next little while. But in particular, one of the most perennial favorite topics areas was spirituality. Spirituality versus philosophy, not really separated in the public mind. And so there are lots of topics that just kept coming up about that sort of thing. So not in the West Coast, so the religion spirituality distinction is sort of almost dogma out here, so that's where the book ends. Okay, I see other hands, so maybe I should stop rambling on. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Michael. Tulsa, you had a question?
Yeah, hi. Thank you so much. I just thought maybe to explain that Gerd Achenbach, for those who don't know him, is one of the earliest philosophical practitioners. Started up his shop in '82. So that's the book that you're translating now, or some of his works, right?
From early on.
Yeah. Okay, great. So I was wondering, because you mentioned, or I have two questions. One very quick. Do you do the sessions for 3 hours? Was that what you said?
In the beginning, I did.
Wow.
So 7 to 10. Now there was a break, and I typically started in casual West Coast fashion a little bit late. But in the end, I started a little bit more promptly at 7 or 7:30 and ended more strictly at 9 o'clock, because the cafe needed to clear out and stuff like that. So yeah, it was 3 hours in the beginning, and
Okay, that's harsh. I would only imagine my head boiling after that time. But so could you said something about, or can you say something about philosophy for children without going into detail or method? But because I think it's super interesting, and it's a source to take to be inspired from philosophical cafes in public places. Can you say something on your opinion on how philosophy for children differs, or more maybe interesting, how what they have in common? Would you say that there is a big difference, or would you say that it's pretty similar what you're doing in Café Philo Café?
Yeah, I think it is quite similar, and obviously there could, because what you're dealing with, the similarities of just overt descriptions of what's going on is kind of is striking enough. I mean, you're philosophizing with children, so these children have no idea about what philosophy is. They have no background, they haven't read Plato. I mean, they just don't know what's going on. But the same thing about Café Philosophy people, right? They haven't read Plato. They don't know who Kant is. You can't bring up, like sometimes people would say stuff at Café Philosophy, and you say, oh, can't say that, and they'd get offended, like, it was my idea. Oh, great, someone else said, right? So you have to, how to bring in those ancients, and how you have to sneak it in a certain way. And similarly, you can't like hit people over the head with theories and debates and stuff when in philosophy for children. The other thing about philosophy as children is that it's a much more open and broader conception of philosophy, from Dewey, about sort of opening up to experience. So there's a whole sensory dimension and stuff. I think some of those things can definitely be used in Café Philosophy. And the games that I come up with are not all sort of logic based. There are also, I have plans for kind of pantomime and not pantomime, but acting, what's it called? Role play kinds of things with philosophy, because I think that really gets to like the emotional core of philosophical debates can be enacted and reached through acting, you know. So and that's well observed and well known within philosophy for children. So and some of Walter Cohen's devices and tricks and exercises are completely applicable to Café Philosophy, and he's been brought to various Café Philosophy series and all over the world to try to display them. One, for example, that is really great is you take a great slogan in philosophy. You know, you can pick anything you like, I think therefore I am, or anyone Buddhist, and you just write that out, and everyone get, or maybe take one word out and invite everybody to put their own word in. It's no longer an investigation of what the original meant. It's sort of what people want to make of it, and so on. And it opens up the discussion. You can go to everyone can make a contribution, and you get some very interesting ideas depending on what you started with. So those kinds of things can be incorporated into Café Philosophy. Many of those exercises, I think, can be. And of course, there are differences too, because you're dealing with political actors. I mean, it's more political in a broad sense. It's democratic, and I mean, no one can say Dewey wasn't a Democrat, but it's more civic engagement, civil engagement. Yes, and so I think like so there, I think like questions about truth and justice become much more urgent, and moving away from a sort of a opinion-based or different points of view. Yeah, and anyway, I think that's thank you. So we have
Any more questions? Yes, Katarina.
Hi, glad to be here. I'm glad to
Hi.
hear you, Michael. Well, I'm looking at the book chapters, which someone was nice enough to paste into the chat. And I'm noticing that the word play comes up in most of the book chapters, chapter titles. So I was wondering how you distinguish the different themes of each chapter. I mean, I'm not asking you to explain each chapter, but maybe like broadly what the different themes are.
You want to know how the sausages are made? That's what you want to know. Like, this book started out with just these essays, and originally it existed as a collection called Philosophy A to Z, because I couldn't think of any other better way to organize them than alphabetically. But that was boring, and no publishers were interested in that for a very long time, especially since, because they were, some of them are kind of definitional or work even with the OED. Some of the essays that I wrote are sort of closely rely on OED, historical definitions of words. So I had all this text, but I really needed a conceit for the book. And how to play philosophy and philosophy sports all came up at the same time. And that's when I decided, okay, so maybe I make the website, my counseling website, call that coaching. And then there's like a theme. So it's, in some sense, it's a bit of a gimmick. It's a way I packaged it. But it proved to be very useful because the word play, because I already had an essay on play, which in fact I changed almost not a bit for the book, and it was written well beforehand. But I broke them into, they're really different kind of subject areas. Like there's spirituality, metaphysics, epistemology, ethics or values broadly, and some stuff about myths and mythology. So I just put them in different categories. But then when I had the idea of play, I thought, oh, well, you know, I can actually name all the chapters with the various colloquial phrases and so on that there are with the word play. But play means, first of all, there's a kind of playfulness of the character of the writing. There's a lot of literary devices or rhetorical devices. So there's a play that is kind of uncommon in philosophy. There's humor throughout. So that's what the play kind of means. So it actually is a very good, and plus like the way that play plays into theories about social development and the development of the self through play, social psychology theories and so on that come up a few places in the book. It all seemed like a perfect kind of axis to build everything on. But the actual chapter titles and so on, and even the first paragraphs describing the contents of the chapters, those the publisher said, oh, we just require that for our style. You have to have that. So I, okay, I'll write that. So, but that actually, it was helpful in the end because it places the essays in the context of the Café Philosophy and the needs for the Café Philosophy. And without that, I think it's a little bit, some of them might be a little bit strange as philosophy, at least from my training where you're supposed to prove stuff.